or two. It's going to be two. There was a lot here, and there's just a lot involved with this particular prophecy. And so, to remind you, Daniel was praying because he had been reading the book of Jeremiah, and Jeremiah prophesied these 70 years where Israel was going to be captive. And, based on how long Israel had been there, Daniel knows the time was approaching. And so he begins to pray, and he prays very earnestly. And God sends the angel Gabriel to give him a vision in answer to that prayer. And the answer that Daniel ends up getting goes far beyond what he was expecting or what he thought would come in answer to that prayer. And so Gabriel comes and he shows him this vision that shows not only will there be restoration for Israel, but that restoration is going to go far beyond just coming out of Babylon and going back into the land. It's going to involve a spiritual restoration as well. And so let's just go ahead and read these 4 verses because it's all together, but we're only going to be looking at the first 2 tonight. And so Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, Gabriel says, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem under the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not from himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the end thereof shall be with the flood, and under the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. All right, so here again we have, this is Gabriel's answer to Daniel's prayer, again, originally concerning Jeremiah's prophecy of the 70 years of captivity. And so as we just said, this goes well beyond those particular 70 years. And so for verse 24, which we just read it, we won't read it again, but for verse 24, several observations need to be made because verse 24 is really setting up the prophecy for us. And so a couple of explanations are necessary as well. So verse 24, the first thing he says is 70 weeks. And so this prophecy will find its fulfillment. It will be completed in what Gabriel describes as 70 weeks. Now, this has obviously been a source of misunderstanding and confusion for some. The Hebrew word there for weeks just means 7. It's a period of 7. It could be 7 hours, it could be 7 days, it could be 7 years, it could be 700 years. It's just a period of 7. And so typically that word is translated week in the Old Testament, but not every time. And so essentially what has to happen then is the context then has to determine for us what the 7 is in reference to. And so what it literally says is that 77s are determined. Well, what are the 7s? And so the context here points us to, when you look at the totality of the prophecy, and we start kind of putting together some of the pieces of this, it becomes very, very clear that the weeks are years. In other words, 1 week would be 7 years. Okay, so when Gabriel says that 70 weeks, what he's saying are 70 periods of 7 years. Or for a total of, if it's easier to understand that way, 490 years. Okay, so that's the total number that he's looking at, 490 years. And like I said, if all we had was verse 24, that wouldn't be so clear. But when we have the rest of the prophecy added into it, we can see that is what he's saying. Secondly, again, all this is in verse 24. Secondly, the prophecy is determined. 70 weeks are determined. This is very pointed, strong language and Gabriel's speaking for God here. And so when he says that this is determined, now all of God's prophecies are determined. If God is giving a word to a prophet, that word is sure. But we don't always get the surety of the prophecy proclaimed in the prophecy itself. And so he says 70 weeks are determined. And so this is, he's putting it out here all on the outset, this is the sovereign will of God. There is nothing that can change this. There is nothing that could stop this from being fulfilled. Now, like I said, anytime God gives a prophecy to one of his prophets, that's always the case. But we're told here specifically that this has been determined. And as God is sovereign, when he determines something, that thing is true or will become true. And so we're given a surety for this, right at the very beginning of this explanation of this vision. And then number 3 is really important. It is determined for the people and the holy city of God. Right? 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. Well, who is he talking to? He's talking to Daniel. And so we have to determine who's Daniel's people. What is Daniel's city? Well, Daniel's people are the Jews. Daniel's city is Jerusalem. And it's not talking about Babylon. Yeah, he may have been there for most of his life, but that's not what Daniel would have ever said, that's my city. No, my people are the Jews. My city is Jerusalem. And so this is, again, very, very clear, and it would have been the case for any Jewish person. They would have been able to identify with this. And so why does that matter? That matters because this particular prophecy, which is so important, shows us that it is wholly concerned. It is wholly concerned with the Jewish people and the city of Jerusalem. Now, by that, I do not mean that Gentiles are not going to be involved with the things talked about in this particular prophecy. But they are not the objects of the prophecy. The object of the prophecy are the Jewish people and the city of Jerusalem. And so as we see, we'll see this more so next week, but Gentiles will play a pretty large role in this particular prophecy. But again, they're not the objects of it. Fourth, its purpose. The purpose of this prophecy is it is sixfold. And this is, again, important for our understanding that some of this has been at least partially fulfilled. We'll talk about that in a second. Some of it has very clearly not been fulfilled. And so it is obviously showing us that there's still things we are waiting on, things in the future. And so to see the sixfold purpose of the 70 weeks vision. Number 1, to finish the transgression, And so sin will be at least restrained, at most removed. Okay, sin will be dealt with. Number 2, to make an end of sins. And so the power of sin will be broken, again, at least partially and at most completely. It will make reconciliation for iniquity. And this is an interesting one to me because the word for reconciliation there is the same word for covering. It's used over 100 times in the Old Testament. 71 of those times it is translated atonement. So we talk about the Day of Atonement. That's the same word being used here as reconciliation. And so reconciliation, which is a coming together, or I guess you could say a re-coming together, a mending of a relationship, it happens through atonement. That's what Daniel's telling us here. And so we can see then that for the first 3, what you can say is that they were at least partially fulfilled at Calvary. And I think you could say that maybe for number 3, completely fulfilled at Calvary. And the reason I say partially is because number 1 and number 2, I think you could say it began at Calvary and it will be completed in eternity. Right? The same way that I would say that God has dealt with the legal penalty of my sin, but I can't say that the sin problem that exists within me is completely eradicated here. It will be in eternity, right? And so it has begun, but it will be completed in eternity. And so I would say that numbers 1 and 2 began at Calvary. Number 3 was fulfilled at Calvary. But then 4, 5, and 6, we're still waiting on these. And so the fourth purpose is to bring in everlasting righteousness. This is eternal. That's what that word means. It is to bring in eternal righteousness. We don't have eternal righteousness yet, right? That's something that happens in eternity. And so we're waiting on eternity to seal up the vision and prophecy. To seal up the vision and prophecy basically tells us that we don't need revelation anymore. And that by that it doesn't mean we don't need any new revelation. It's that we don't need any revelation. I would agree that we don't need any new revelation. All right? No pastor can get up and honestly say, God spoke to me and told me to say that. No, we don't need new revelation. The scriptures are the revelation of God. And so when it says it's going to seal this up, we are done away with not just new revelation, we are done away with all revelation. It won't be necessary anymore. And so, obviously, no Christian would say that we're living in a time where Scripture is not necessary. No true Christian would say that. And so, again, this is future. And then the last one, and this one's debated, but the last one says to anoint the most holy. To anoint the most holy. Again, pretty debated phrase, but I would agree with the majority, and even amongst premillennials, it's a little bit debated. But the majority of premillennials would say, and I would agree, that this is likely in reference to Ezekiel's temple. And when it says to anoint the most holy, it's literally talking about the Holy of Holies that will exist in Ezekiel's temple. Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel, spends a lot of time talking about a temple, and it gives very specific and detailed measurements and designs for this particular temple. Well, that was not Solomon's temple. It was not the temple that they built upon returning from Babylon. It's very different. So this is a future temple. And again, most premillennials would say that's not even the temple that we believe will be built in the tribulation era, but this is a millennial temple. Now, a lot of people get up in arms about the fact that we believe that there's going to be a temple built in the millennium. And I understand the pushback on that. I do. But it will serve as a memorial purpose. It won't be the same. The sacrifices won't be done in the same as they were in the old covenant. They will be done in a memorial type way to give us a memory, I guess you could say, of what Christ did for us. Obviously, those sacrifices don't need to be done for any kind of spiritual purposes anymore. And so, again, to anoint the most holy, I would say, along with others, that this is in reference to Ezekiel's temple. Now, again, I reiterate, the first three have already been fulfilled, at least partially. The final three are clearly still yet in the future. Right? And so these are things that we are still waiting on. And so verse 24 then sets the scene for us. Some of these things, now to Daniel, all of it was future. But to us today, some of these things, we were still waiting on them, but some of these things have already been fulfilled. To quote Pentecost here, he said, by the time these 490 years run their course, God will have completed 6 things for Israel. The first 3 have to do with sin, and the second 3 with the kingdom. The basis for the first 3 was provided in the work of Christ on the cross, but all 6 will be realized by Israel at the second advent of Christ. Now again, keep in mind that the purpose of this prophecy, the objects of this prophecy is Israel. It is the Jewish people. And let me be more specific. The ethnic descendants of Abraham, right? And the reason I say that is because somebody could go, fly over to Israel, become a citizen. That doesn't make you a biblical Israelite, right? You might be a citizen of modern-day Israel, but when the Bible gives promises to Israel in the Old Testament, it's not talking about, a citizen of modern. It's ethnic descendants of Abraham. Those are the Israelites that the Bible is talking about. And so we want to be clear about that. But since it's saying all that, since they are the objects of this particular vision, these 3 things, or I guess I could say all 6 of these things show us what is a spiritual restoration for Israel. And there's a couple of places we could turn to. I won't take the time to do it tonight, but Zechariah talks about that there's going to be a point in the future where they will look on the one whom they have pierced. Paul, we'll get there eventually. Paul in Romans chapter 11 says that there's going to be a time where all Israel will be converted. And so when is that going to take place? Now, there's going to be a lot of conversions happening during the tribulation period. A lot of Jewish people are going to get saved, but it's not going to be the wholesale restoration of Israel until Christ returns. And when Christ returns, what are they going to do? As Zechariah said, they're going to look on the one whom they have pierced, and then, as Paul said, all Israel will be saved at that particular point. And so when that happens, then we would see the fulfillment of all 6 of these things that we have read here in verse 24. And so again, why is it important that we understand who this is being written to? Because I don't want to spiritualize this and say all 6 of these things have already found their fulfillment in the church. That's what a lot of people try to do with this. The prophecy itself won't allow you to do that. Because even if you want to say that 70 weeks are determined upon thy people, and the argument would say, well, Christ has grafted in the church, and so the church has now taken over the promises given to Israel, and so the prophecies given to Israel are fulfilled in the church. what do you do then with the holy city? Right? And so if we're going to spiritualize people, we also have to spiritualize holy city. And what does that mean now? And so there's problems if you try to take this as spiritual and not literal. And so again, verse 24 shows us what this is and what it's for. What is it for? Not only the physical restoration of Israel, but much more important, the spiritual restoration of Israel. And so this, again, we can understand why God gives this to Daniel at this particular time, not only because he wanted to relate this information. Right? Daniel was to write this down, it was to become scripture, but he was giving Daniel a far greater answer to the prayers than Daniel was given that he could have ever imagined. Right? Daniel was just praying, God, let us go back. Let us go back to the land. And God essentially tells him, not only is that going to happen, but let me do you one better. They're all going to come to me spiritually. All of Israel will come to know me and be in right relationship with me. And so obviously that would have been Daniel's prayer, maybe not specifically in regards to the Jeremiah prophecy, but ultimately that would have been his desire, and God's here telling him that is exactly what's going to happen. Now, there's still a long time. There's still a long time till that happens in regards to Daniel. But nevertheless, it's going to take place because, again, it has been determined. It has been determined by God. And so verse 24 then sets up for us what this prophecy is about, what the vision is about, what's going to take place. And then starting in verse 25, we kind of get into some of the specifics. Okay, and so verse 25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And so this is where understanding what those weeks are matters, okay? And so I want to make one observation before we get into that detail. Gabriel tells Daniel, verse 25, know therefore and understand. Understand this, Daniel. I'm giving you this vision. I'm giving you the interpretation of this vision. I need you to get this. I need you to understand it. And why that matters is because that tells us that this prophecy is knowable. This prophecy is understandable. We don't have to wait until these things are fulfilled in order to understand what it is it's saying. Now, obviously, when you're on the other side of a prophecy, you see it clearer, but that we don't have to be on the other side of the prophecy in order to understand what it is telling us, what it is actually saying. Now, as I said a while ago, almost everything that Gabriel gives in this particular prophecy is future, and not only future to Daniel, after his death. Daniel would not live to see almost all of this prophecy take place. But Gabriel still tells him to know and understand. And so if Gabriel's telling Daniel, you can get this, even though you won't live to see it, I take that to mean that we can get this, we can know this, we can understand this, and we should. We should know it, and we should understand it. And so, that being said, again, what kicks all this off? If there is a determined amount of time, 490 years, if there is a determined amount of time, it will start at a specific date, right? It's not just 490 years and it'll just start whenever I feel like it. No, it's 490 years and it will kick off with a certain event. And so he says specifically, when will it begin? It will begin from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem. Again, what is this prophecy concerned with? Daniel's people, Daniel's city, right? And so the 70 weeks then begin with this commandment to restore, to rebuild Jerusalem. Now, the issue here is that there are 4 different decrees in the Bible, not just historically. There are 4 different decrees in the Scripture that people could say was the fulfillment of this particular prophecy. And so the first one was a decree given by Cyrus. This is in Ezra chapter 1. The second is a decree by Darius. And I'll tell you this, almost nobody actually agrees that the Darius decree was what this is in reference to, because Cyrus's decree was to allow the people to go back and rebuild the temple. Darius's decree basically just said, let's remember that decree. I'm saying that that's still a good decree. You need to do that. And so it wasn't even really new. And then Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes has 2, one in Ezra chapter 7, one in Nehemiah chapter 2. The first one was very much in line with the others, permission to go back and rebuild the temple. And then the fourth one, which is what I believe this is in reference to, again, many other premillennials would as well, is a decree in Nehemiah chapter 2 for them to actually go back and rebuild Jerusalem. And so that matters, because the other three deal specifically with the temple. Artaxerxes' second decree is the only one in Scripture that specifically deals with the city of Jerusalem. And that matters because of the program of God. Now, also added to that is when you do the work that needs to be done with the years, the fourth one there is really the only one that can work, just from a prophetic year standpoint. But again, even in the content of the decree, it is the only one that I believe really matches and fulfills the prophecy. And so that event then begins this. And we're not guessing on this. We're told, verse 25, know this, that it begins when? From the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem. And then he tells us, unto Messiah the Prince there will be 7 weeks, and then 62 or 62. So 7 weeks and then 62 weeks. Now, again, and this is, I understand it kind of gets hard to keep all the numbers together. And so the 7 weeks are 7 weeks of years, so 49 years. The 62 weeks are 62 weeks of years, or 434 years. Okay, and so Artaxerxes' second decree came in the year 445 BC. And so we take 49 years from that date for the first 7 weeks, as it says. Now, the thing about this particular thing, or this particular year, is that there's not necessarily a definite event that takes place after these. In verse 25, it's split, that there will be 7 weeks and then 62. Right? And so there's not like this definite event that takes place 49 years after that decree was given. However, and so this has been widely debated. Why does Daniel here split these? Why does he not just say there are 69 weeks? Why does he say there's 7 weeks, then 62 weeks, and then one final week? Right? Why is there a split between the 7 and the 62? And so, like I said, there's not a definite event that takes place. But if you move forward, and then you have the completion of the temple and Jerusalem. Jerusalem and the temple both have been rebuilt, reestablished. The people are in the land. And so this is kind of the rebirth, almost you could say, of the nation of Israel. And so all of that would have been completed within that 49-year window. And so I do think that that's probably what that is in reference to and why it is split. And so, and just as another added fulfillment here, he specifically says at the end of verse 25 that after this time that the street shall be built again and the wall, and he says, even in troublous times. Even in troublous times. If you go read the book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah specifically refers to kind of this rebuilding of Jerusalem, and he goes into a lot of detail about the trouble that they faced while they were trying to do that. In fact, they faced quite a bit of pushback by their neighbors and everybody else who did not want them back. And so, again, we find an exact fulfillment from Daniel's prophecy here that they did get rebuilt, but it was during troublous times, right? And so we have another fulfillment of that. And then from that particular date, you move forward another 434 years to get the 62 weeks, and that brings us to the year 32 AD. Now, I won't get into all of this because it gets very detailed. There's a guy, and some people disagree with him, but there's a guy, Sir Robert Anderson. He wrote a book called The Coming Prince. And what he did is he took these particular dates and he calculated them using not a 365-day year, but a 360-day year, which is what the Jewish people would have used. And there's a lot of reasons why we know that to be, in fact, that can be proved biblically, that they use 360-day calendar years. Now, the issue is, every now and then, they would have to throw in some additional days and weeks, to kind of catch up with the lunar cycle and everything. That's why we have now 365 days instead of 360. So there's a lot of kind of things they had to calculate. But he did all these calculations. He added in all the days and things that were necessary, and he came up with the date of April 6th, 32 AD, which would have been the exact amount of years, and by years, that would have been calculated by days, from that original decree. And again, he got to April 6, 32 AD. Now, April 6th in 32 AD would have been right around, and I would say probably the exact day, but just to give a little wiggle room, right around the time that Jesus would have been riding into Jerusalem for what is called the triumphal entry. Right? And so as Jesus is riding into Jerusalem, and why this is so significant is because verse 25, again, it says, from the commandment to restore to the Messiah, the Prince. Not just the Messiah, but the Messiah, the Prince. Because there's some people who think, well, he's probably referencing his birth. Well, he's not referencing his birth. He says the Messiah, the Prince. This is a royal affair. This is a kingly engagement, right? And so the time that Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem is the only time in his entire ministry where anybody would have ever relegated to Jesus something that might be considered princely. There is no other time in his ministry where people did the kinds of things that they did during that triumphal entry. We read in John chapter 12, as he's coming in, the people are shouting out, Hosanna, blessed is the King of Israel that cometh in the name of the Lord. Right? That is the only time where people worshiped him, not just as a miracle maker, right? Not just as this rabbi who knows these amazing things about the Scripture. This is the only time we read of in all of Scripture where Jesus was, for a brief moment of time, worshipped as a king. Right? This is a royal worship. And so here, again, I believe to the day God prophesied exactly not only when Jerusalem would be rebuilt, but to the day when Jesus would come and be worshipped, again, if just for a moment, as a king. And so again, all of this is found with very specific detail here in this particular prophecy. Now, if we have the 7 weeks that we talked about, the 49 years, you add to that the 62 weeks, that's 69. What were we told in verse 24? That 70 weeks are determined. Right, well, we've had 69 of those. And so there's 1 week left, or 1 7-year period left. Now, we're going to look at that more next week, but it's very obvious that after verse 25, the 69 weeks have ended, and then we get verse 26 before we ever get to the final week of verse 27. And so before we even look at anything, we can see that just by the prophecy itself, he was determining that there was going to be some particular gap in between the 69th week and the 70th week, right? And so we're still waiting on that 70th week. And I will add, again, we'll look at this more next week, but verse 26, after this time, after the Messiah the Prince, what happens? He's going to be cut off. And so here again, we have another beautifully written prophecy concerning Jesus, concerning the Messiah, concerning what he was going to come and do. I think very obviously showed there would be a gap between the 69th week and the 70th week. And so we're waiting on this one final week, this one final 7-year period. And what do we read? Verse 27, he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Right? And so here we're shown that God knew exactly, and again, he's sovereign, he knows the end from the beginning. And so God knew exactly what was left for his people. And this is also important, because here people would say, well, why has there been this long gap? Well, because now we're in what the Bible calls the times of the Gentiles, right? And so Jesus, or God has, I don't want to say completely shifted his focus. That's not really the proper way to say it. But he is now, to use the Romans terminology, grafted Gentiles in, and we are receiving salvific grace from God. And so we're in the times of the Gentiles. Well, that time is not permanent. That times of the Gentiles is going to end. And it's going to end with that final 70th week where God is going to, again, finish his program with his people. And the completion of that program is what? It is all of them coming to know Christ, all of them coming to believe. And so that's what we're waiting on, is this glorious spiritual restoration of the people of God. And so this is why this particular prophecy is so important. And why it's important that we know what it's about and who it's to, because we don't want to misinterpret it and see us being Gentiles. We don't want to see us where we're not supposed to be. We want to keep the focus where Scripture has made the focus. And really the only way I think you can properly do that is to interpret it literally as it says. And just before we end, I would say that Daniel has already given us precedent to do that because he read Jeremiah's prophecy, and he didn't think, well, I know he said 70 years, but that's clearly symbolic, and who could possibly know what 70 actually means? No, Daniel read Jeremiah's prophecy of 70 years and believed that when he said 70, he meant 70. And so now I can read when Daniel says 70 weeks, he meant 70 weeks. And we just have to allow the context to show us what the weeks are, right? And so, again, there's precedent within the very chapter to take that literally. And so, as always, I think that's the best approach to Scripture anyways. So, anyways, really important things. And then next week, again, just more fascinating. We'll see some interesting things with regards to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD, because a lot of people would say that kind of ended things. But we'll see how that's really not possible biblically with regards to this prophecy. Anyways, that's what we got coming up next week. So.